My name is Ethan Brooks, and I'm 37 years old. 4 months ago, I stood in a courtroom watching my aunt and uncle's attorney present what they claimed was my grandmother's final will, a document that supposedly left her lakeside house to them instead of to me. The house was worth approximately $850,000 and was the only place in my entire childhood that had ever felt like home. But as their attorney confidently presented their case, I pulled out a USB drive containing an encrypted email my grandmother had sent to her attorney 3 weeks before she passed. An email where she explicitly stated she was being pressured to sign documents she didn't understand, and that her lakeside house should go to me, her grandson, who had always loved it. The look on my aunt and uncle's faces when the judge reviewed the email and ordered a handwriting analysis of the supposedly new will was the moment I knew justice would be served. If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment about where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because what happened next proved that sometimes family members who smile at funerals are the same ones who forge wills and steal inheritances. But to understand how I got to that courtroom, standing up against family members who had tried to steal the one place that meant everything to me, I need to take you back to my childhood and show you why my grandmother's lakeside house was so much more than just property. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, as the only child of parents who were, to put it kindly, not suited for parenthood. My father, Derek Brooks, was an alcoholic who struggled to hold down jobs and spent most of his time drinking and watching television. My mother, Karen, was emotionally distant and seemed perpetually disappointed with her life and with me. Our house was chaotic, tense, and unpredictable. But my grandmother, Ruth Brooks, was different. She lived about 2 hours away in a small lakeside community called Clearwater, in a beautiful house she and my grandfather had built 40 years earlier. The house sat on 3 acres with direct lake access, surrounded by pine trees and overlooking the water. It was peaceful, beautiful, and felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos of my parents' home. From the time I was about 7 years old, I spent summers at Grandma Ruth's house. Those summers were the highlight of my childhood, the only time I felt safe, valued, and genuinely happy. Grandma Ruth would take me fishing on the lake, teach me to cook, let me help in her garden, and most importantly, she would listen to me and treat me like I mattered. "This house will always be here for you, Ethan," she told me countless times over the years. "No matter what happens in your life, you'll always have a place at the lake." My parents rarely visited Grandma Ruth. My father had a difficult relationship with her, resentful that she had never approved of his drinking and his inability to provide for his family. My mother found the lakeside house boring and preferred to spend her free time in the city, but I loved it there. As I got older and my home life became more difficult, I spent more and more time at Grandma Ruth's house. I would visit on weekends, help her with maintenance and repairs, and spend holidays there rather than at my parents' house. Grandma Ruth's other children, my father's siblings, were my Aunt Linda and Uncle Frank. Linda was my father's older sister, married to a man named Carl, and they lived in Seattle. They were both real estate agents who specialized in luxury properties and seemed perpetually focused on money and status. They visited Grandma Ruth occasionally, usually around holidays, but their visits felt transactional rather than genuine. Uncle Frank was my father's younger brother. He was single, worked in sales, and also lived in Seattle. Like Linda, he visited Grandma Ruth infrequently and always seemed more interested in her property and her finances than in her well-being. I noticed over the years that Linda and Frank's visits to Grandma Ruth often involved subtle suggestions that she should sell the lakeside house and move to an assisted living facility in Seattle where she would be closer to family. They would comment on how the house was too much work for her to maintain and how she could free up equity by selling it. Grandma Ruth would always firmly decline these suggestions. "This is my home," she would tell them. "Your father and I built this house together. I'm not leaving unless I absolutely have to." But I could see that their pressure bothered her. After Linda and Frank would visit, Grandma Ruth would often seem tired and stressed, and she would make comments about family members only caring about her property rather than about her. "You're different, Ethan," she told me during one of these conversations when I was in my mid-20s. "You come here because you love this place and because you love me. Linda and Frank come here because they're already planning what to do with the house after I'm gone. I assured her that I would always visit because I genuinely loved being there, which was absolutely true. The lakeside house represented everything my childhood home hadn't been: peaceful, stable, and full of genuine affection. When I was 32, I went through a difficult divorce. My marriage had lasted only 3 years and had fallen apart when my ex-wife, Stephanie, decided she wanted a different life than the one we had built together. The divorce was emotionally devastating, and I struggled with depression and anxiety in the aftermath. During that difficult time, Grandma Ruth opened her home to me completely. I moved into the lakeside house for 6 months, using it as a base while I rebuilt my life and figured out my next steps. She never made me feel like a burden, never pressured me to leave, and her support during that period literally saved me. "This house is your sanctuary," she told me repeatedly during those months. "It always has been, and it always will be. When I'm gone, Ethan, this house is yours. I want you to have it. You're the only one who has ever truly loved it the way your grandfather and I did." I told her not to talk about being gone, that she had many years left, but she was insistent. "I'm being realistic," she said. "I'm 83 years old. I need to make sure my affairs are in order, and I need to make sure you know that this house will be yours." She told me that she had a will prepared by her attorney, a man named Gerald Thompson, who had handled her legal affairs for decades. The will left the lakeside house to me with other assets divided among her 3 children. She estimated the house was worth around $850,000, while her other assets, savings, investments, and personal property totaled about $400,000. "I know Linda and Frank won't be happy about the house going to you instead of being sold and divided," Grandma Ruth said. "But this is my home, and I want it to go to someone who will love it and preserve it. That's you, Ethan." I thanked her and told her I would take care of the house and honor the memories she and Grandpa had created there. But I also hoped she would be around for many more years and that these conversations about inheritance were premature. Over the next few years, I rebuilt my life. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company, a job that paid well and provided stability. I bought a small condo in Portland, but continued visiting Grandma Ruth regularly, usually spending at least one weekend a month at the lakeside house. Grandma Ruth's health remained relatively good for her age. She had some mobility issues and occasional memory problems, but she was still sharp, independent, and living on her own. She refused to consider moving to assisted living, and I supported her decision as long as she could safely maintain her independence. But about 18 months ago, Grandma Ruth's health began to decline more noticeably. She had a fall that resulted in a broken hip, and after surgery and rehabilitation, she never fully regained her previous level of mobility and strength. She started having more frequent memory issues, and her doctors diagnosed her with early-stage dementia. Linda and Frank suddenly became much more attentive. They started visiting more frequently, calling more often, and expressing concerns about Grandma Ruth living alone. They again suggested she should move to assisted living, and this time they were more insistent. "Mom, you're not safe living alone anymore," Linda would say during visits. "What if you fall again? What if there's an emergency and no one is here to help?" I understood their concerns, which were legitimate. But I also noticed that their newfound attention came with increased interest in Grandma Ruth's property and finances. They would ask questions about her bank, accounts, her investments, and particularly about her plans for the lakeside house. I started visiting even more frequently, helping Grandma Ruth with daily tasks, managing her medications, and making sure she had everything she needed. I also helped her interview and hire a part-time caregiver, a wonderful woman named Helen, who came 3 days a week to help with housekeeping, meal preparation, and companionship. With Helen's help and my regular visits, Grandma Ruth was able to continue living in her beloved house safely. She was grateful for the support and repeatedly told me how much it meant to her that I was ensuring she could stay in her home. "Linda and Frank keep pushing me to sell this house," she told me about a year ago, her voice frustrated. "They say it's for my own good, but I know they just want the money from selling it. They don't care that this is my home." "You don't have to sell if you don't want to," I assured her. We'll figure out whatever support you need to stay here safely. But I started to notice something concerning. When Linda and Frank visited, they would often spend time alone with Grandma Ruth, and after these visits, she would seem confused or upset. She made comments about them showing her papers and asking her to sign things, but she couldn't always remember clearly what the papers were about. Linda brought some documents about the house, Grandma Ruth mentioned after one visit. She said they were just routine paperwork, something about property taxes or insurance. But I don't understand why she needs me to sign anything. Gerald handles all my legal matters. I felt uneasy about this, but didn't want to accuse Linda of anything improper without evidence. I did, however, send an email to Gerald Thompson, Grandma Ruth's attorney, asking him to confirm that he was handling all her legal documents and to let me know if Linda or Frank contacted him about her estate. Gerald responded that he was still Grandma Ruth's attorney of record and that he hadn't been contacted by Linda or Frank. He also mentioned that Grandma Ruth's will, which left the lakeside house to me, was still current and hadn't been changed. This reassured me somewhat, but I continued to feel concerned about Linda and Frank's increased interest in Grandma Ruth's affairs. About 9 months ago, Grandma Ruth's dementia progressed to the point where she needed more consistent care than Helen could provide 3 days a week. After consulting with her doctors, I helped arrange for full-time in-home care. This was expensive, costing about $6,000 per month, but Grandma Ruth had sufficient savings to cover it, and it allowed her to continue living in the house she loved. Linda and Frank were critical of this decision. "This is a waste of money," Frank said during a family meeting to discuss Grandma Ruth's care. "She should be in a facility where she can get professional medical care. The cost of full-time in-home care is going to drain her savings." "She wants to stay in her house," I countered. "She has the resources to afford in-home care, and it's what she wants. That should be what matters." "It's easy for you to say that," Linda replied sharply. "You're not the one who will have to deal with the financial fallout when her money runs out. Derek certainly can't help. He can barely take care of himself. Frank and I will be the ones who have to step in and support her." "She has enough savings to cover years of in-home care," I pointed out. "And even if she does eventually need financial help, I'm perfectly willing to contribute." But Linda and Frank seemed more concerned about preserving Grandma Ruth's estate than about her quality of life. Their comments made me increasingly suspicious that they were more interested in their eventual inheritance than in Grandma Ruth's well-being. The situation came to a head about 6 months ago. I received a call from Helen, Grandma Ruth's caregiver, who was concerned about a visit Linda and Frank had made that afternoon. "They showed your grandmother some papers and had her sign them," Helen told me. "She seemed confused and kept asking what she was signing, but they told her it was routine paperwork for the house." I wanted to say something, but I wasn't sure if it was my place. I felt alarm bells going off. I drove to the lakeside house immediately and found Grandma Ruth in bed, tired and confused. "Linda and Frank were here," she said vaguely. "They had papers about the house. They said I needed to update something. I don't remember what it was." "Do you have copies of the papers you signed?" I asked. "No," she replied. "Linda took them. She said she would file them for me." I called Gerald Thompson the next morning and asked if Linda or Frank had been in contact with him about any legal documents for Grandma Ruth. He confirmed they had not. "Gerald, I think Linda and Frank might be trying to manipulate Grandma Ruth into signing legal documents," I told him. "She has dementia, and they're taking advantage of her confusion. Can you contact her to confirm that her will is still what she wants and that she hasn't been pressured to make changes?" "I'll reach out to her," Gerald promised. "If there are concerns about her capacity or about undue influence, we need to address that immediately." But before Gerald could contact Grandma Ruth, something happened that changed everything. 3 days after Linda and Frank's visit, Grandma Ruth had a stroke. She was rushed to the hospital, and despite the doctor's best efforts, she passed away 2 days later. I was devastated. Grandma Ruth had been the most important person in my life, the one who had always supported me and loved me unconditionally. Losing her felt like losing my anchor, my safe place, and my connection to the happiest memories of my life. The funeral was well attended. Many people from Grandma Ruth's community came to pay their respects, and family members gathered, including my parents, Linda, Frank, and various cousins and extended family. At the funeral, Linda and Frank were solicitous and sympathetic. "We're all going to miss Mom so much," Linda said, hugging me. "She was such a special person." I appreciated the condolences, but felt uncomfortable with Linda and Frank's sudden display of grief. They had visited Grandma Ruth rarely except when they wanted something, and now they were acting like devoted children, mourning a beloved mother. After the funeral, family members gathered at Linda and Carl's house in Seattle for a reception. During the reception, Linda asked to speak with me privately in her home office. "Ethan, we need to discuss Mom's estate," Linda began once we were alone. "Frank and I wanted to talk to you before we meet with the attorney." "Okay," I replied, assuming this would be a conversation about logistics and timing for settling the estate. "There's been a change to Mom's will," Linda continued. "About 3 weeks before she passed, Mom updated her will with a new attorney. She decided that the lakeside house should be left to Frank and me jointly rather than to you." I stared at her in disbelief. "What? That's not possible. Grandma Ruth told me repeatedly that the house was mine. She wouldn't have changed that, especially not while she had dementia." "Mom was clear about her wishes," Linda insisted. "She realized that leaving such a valuable property to one person wasn't fair to her other children. She wanted Frank and me to have the house so we could sell it and divide the proceeds. She felt that was more equitable." "This doesn't make sense," I protested. "Grandma Ruth didn't want the house sold. She wanted me to have it because I was the one who spent time there, who loved it, who took care of her. She wouldn't suddenly change her mind when she was barely able to understand what day it was." "She had moments of clarity," Frank chimed in, having joined us in the office. "During one of those moments, she decided to update her will to be more fair to all her children." "You're being very selfish by questioning this, Ethan. The house is worth a lot of money. You can't expect to inherit such a valuable asset while the rest of the family gets nothing." "That's not how her original will was structured," I argued. "The house was going to me, but her other assets were being divided among her 3 children. It was balanced." "The new will supersedes the old one," Linda said firmly. "And frankly, Ethan, we think you're being greedy by fighting this. You're not even Mom's child, you're her grandson. Frank and I are her actual children. It makes sense that we would inherit her most valuable asset." I felt stunned and betrayed. Not only were Linda and Frank claiming that Grandma Ruth had changed her will, but they were positioning me as the greedy one for questioning it. "I want to see this new will," I demanded, "and I want to talk to the attorney who supposedly prepared it." "You'll see it when we all meet for the estate settlement," Linda replied coolly. "Until then, I'd appreciate if you didn't spread accusations about our mother's final wishes. It's disrespectful to her memory." I left Linda's house feeling sick and angry. Everything about this felt wrong. The timing, Linda and Frank's sudden claim about a new will, their insistence that Grandma Ruth had wanted them to have the house, despite years of her telling me the opposite. I called Gerald Thompson as soon as I got home and told him what Linda and Frank had claimed about a new will. "That's news to me," Gerald said, sounding concerned. "I'm still Ruth's attorney of record, and I haven't prepared any new will for her. If she did create a new will with another attorney, that's unusual and concerning, especially given her dementia diagnosis. Let me do some research and see what I can find out." Over the next week, Gerald discovered that Linda and Frank had indeed presented a will to the probate court, claiming it was Grandma Ruth's final will executed 3 weeks before her passing. The will had been prepared by an attorney named Mark Stevens, someone Gerald had never heard of and who apparently specialized in quick estate planning services. The new will left the lakeside house jointly to Linda and Frank, with Grandma Ruth's other assets divided among her 3 children. According to the document, Grandma Ruth had changed her mind about leaving the house to me because she felt it was unfair to her children. "This doesn't pass the smell test," Gerald told me. "Ruth was very clear about her wishes regarding that house. She wanted you to have it. The idea that she would suddenly change her mind when she had dementia and do so through an attorney she'd never worked with before is highly suspicious." "Can we challenge this?" I asked. Yes, Gerald replied. We can contest the will on grounds of lack of capacity and undue influence. Ruth had dementia, which raises questions about whether she had the mental capacity to execute a new will. And if Linda and Frank pressured her to sign documents she didn't understand, that's undue influence. But we'll need evidence to support those claims. What kind of evidence? Medical records showing her dementia and cognitive decline, testimony from caregivers about her mental state, any documentation of Linda and Frank pressuring her or manipulating her, and ideally any statements Ruth made about her true wishes regarding the property. I thought about the conversations Grandma Ruth and I had over the years, her repeated statements that the house would be mine, her concerns about Linda and Frank only caring about money. But most of those conversations had been private, just the two of us with no documentation. I'll start gathering everything I can, I told Gerald. Medical records, statements from Helen the caregiver, anything that shows Grandma Ruth's true wishes and her mental state when this supposed new will was signed. Do that, Gerald advised. And Ethan, be prepared for this to get ugly. Will contests often bring out the worst in families? Linda and Frank are going to fight this, and they're going to make you look like the bad guy for challenging their mother's final wishes. He was right about that. Within days of Gerald filing a formal contest of the will, Linda and Frank began reaching out to extended family members, positioning me as a greedy nephew who was trying to steal their inheritance and disrespect their mother's final wishes. My own father, who had been largely absent throughout this entire situation, called to tell me I should drop the contest. Just let it go, Ethan, he said. Linda and Frank are your family. You're causing unnecessary conflict. Dad, they forged Grandma Ruth's will, I replied. They took advantage of her dementia to steal property she explicitly wanted me to have. I'm not going to let that go. You can't prove that, my father argued. And fighting with family over money is ugly. Your grandmother wouldn't want this. Grandma Ruth would want her actual wishes honored, I countered. Not whatever Linda and Frank manipulated her into signing when she didn't understand what she was doing. The conversation ended badly, with my father essentially taking Linda and Frank's side. Most of the extended family did the same, believing the story Linda and Frank told about Grandma Ruth changing her mind and about me being unwilling to accept it. I felt isolated and alone, fighting against my entire family to honor what I knew were Grandma Ruth's true wishes. But I was determined to see this through no matter how difficult it became. Over the next several weeks, I threw myself into building a case to contest the will. I worked closely with Gerald Thompson, gathering every piece of evidence we could find to demonstrate that the new will was invalid due to Grandma Ruth's lack of mental capacity and due to undue influence from Linda and Frank. The first thing we did was obtain Grandma Ruth's complete medical records from the last 2 years of her life. These records documented her cognitive decline, her dementia diagnosis, her stroke, and the progressive deterioration of her mental faculties. The records showed that 3 weeks before her passing, when the supposed new will was signed, Grandma Ruth's dementia had progressed to the point where she frequently didn't recognize people, couldn't remember recent events, and struggled with basic decision-making. These medical records are powerful evidence, Gerald told me. They show that Ruth didn't have the mental capacity to execute a valid will 3 weeks before her passing. She couldn't understand complex legal documents or make informed decisions about her estate. We also obtained a statement from Helen, Grandma Ruth's caregiver, who had been present during many of Linda and Frank's visits. Helen provided a detailed account of how Linda and Frank had pressured Grandma Ruth, shown her papers she didn't understand, and had her sign documents while she was confused and asking what she was signing. Mrs. Brooks would ask repeatedly what she was signing, Helen wrote in her statement. Linda would tell her it was routine paperwork about the house, nothing to worry about. But Mrs. Brooks seemed confused and uncertain. She would ask if she should wait for Ethan or call her lawyer, and Linda would tell her it wasn't necessary, that this was simple and needed to be done right away. Helen's statement was crucial because it showed a pattern of manipulation and pressure which supported our claim of undue influence. But I needed more. I needed something that definitively proved Grandma Ruth's true wishes and showed that any documents signed near the end of her life were the result of pressure rather than her genuine intent. That's when I remembered something. Grandma Ruth had been relatively tech-savvy for her age. She had an email account, used Facebook to keep in touch with friends, and even had a tablet she used for reading and video calls. After she passed, I had gathered her personal belongings from the house, including her tablet, intending to go through them eventually to handle any digital accounts or subscriptions. I pulled out the tablet and began going through her emails, looking for anything that might be relevant to the will or to her wishes about the lakeside house. Most of the emails were routine correspondence with friends, newsletters, and shopping confirmations. But then I found something that made my heart race. 3 weeks before Grandma Ruth passed, right around the time Linda and Frank claimed she had executed the new will with attorney Mark Stevens, there was an email in her sent folder to Gerald Thompson. The subject line read, "Urgent. Need to discuss pressure from Linda and Frank." But when I tried to open the email, I discovered it had been encrypted. The email client showed that an encrypted file was attached, but I would need a password to open it. I immediately called Gerald. "Did Grandma Ruth send you an encrypted email about 3 weeks before she passed?" "I never received any encrypted email from Ruth," Gerald replied. "But if she tried to send one, it's possible it was caught by spam filters or there was some technical issue that prevented delivery. Do you have access to the email?" "I have her tablet and I can see the email in her sent folder, but it's encrypted," I explained. "I don't know the password. Can you send me the email file?" Gerald asked. "I have a forensic IT specialist I work with who might be able to help decrypt it. If Ruth was documenting pressure from Linda and Frank, that email could be the smoking gun we need." I sent the encrypted email file to Gerald, who forwarded it to his IT specialist, a man named Kevin Zhao who specialized in digital forensics and data recovery. Kevin called me the next day with questions about Grandma Ruth's typical password patterns. "Did your grandmother use any consistent passwords or password patterns?" Kevin asked. "Common words, birthdays, addresses, pet names, anything that might give us a starting point?" I thought about what Grandma Ruth would have used as a password for something important. She had told me once that she used variations of meaningful dates and places for her passwords. Her wedding anniversary, my grandfather's birthday, the address of the lakeside house. I gave Kevin a list of possible password combinations, and he said he would try them along with some decryption tools he had. 2 days later, Kevin called back with news. "I was able to decrypt the email using a combination of the lakeside house address and your grandfather's birthday. The email is intact, and you're going to want to read this." Gerald and I met at his office to review the decrypted email together. What we read was exactly what we needed to prove our case. The email, dated 3 weeks and 2 days before Grandma Ruth's passing, read, "Dear Gerald, I'm writing this email to you because I'm concerned about what Linda and Frank are asking me to do. They've been visiting more frequently and showing me papers they want me to sign. They say the papers are about the house and about making things fair for everyone. But I'm confused, Gerald. I thought we already had everything set up the way I wanted it, with the lakeside house going to Ethan. Now Linda is telling me that's not fair, that I need to change things so they can sell the house and split the money. I don't want the house sold. I want Ethan to have it. He's the one who loves this place. He's the one who has been here for me. But Linda keeps pressuring me, saying I'm being unfair to my own children, saying Ethan is manipulating me. I'm so confused and my memory isn't what it used to be. I'm worried they're going to trick me into signing something I don't understand. Can you please call me so we can discuss this? I need to make sure my real wishes are protected. The house should go to Ethan. That hasn't changed, no matter what Linda says. Please help me. Ruth." Reading that email, I felt overwhelming sadness and vindication simultaneously. Grandma Ruth had known what Linda and Frank were trying to do. She had tried to reach out for help to protect her true wishes, and she had explicitly stated that the lakeside house should go to me, not to them. "This is incredibly powerful evidence," Gerald said, his voice filled with conviction. Ruth explicitly states that she's being pressured, that she's confused, and that her true wish is for you to have the house. This email proves both lack of capacity and undue influence. Combined with the medical records and Helen's statement, we have a very strong case. "Why didn't you receive this email when she sent it?" I asked. "I don't know," Gerald admitted. "It's possible there was a technical glitch, or my spam filter caught it, or something went wrong with the encryption process. But the important thing is that we have it now, and it's dated and authenticated." This is Ruth's voice, clearly stating her true wishes and documenting that she was being pressured by Linda and Frank. We immediately filed the encrypted email as evidence in the will contest. We also filed a motion for handwriting analysis of the signature on the new will, arguing that given Ruth's documented cognitive decline and her stated concerns about being pressured, the court should verify that the signature was actually hers. Linda and Frank's attorney objected strenuously to both filings. They argued that the email was irrelevant, that Ruth's concerns had been addressed when she met with attorney Mark Stevens and voluntarily executed the new will, and that requesting handwriting analysis was an unnecessary expense and delay tactic. But the judge overseeing the probate case, Judge Margaret Sullivan, was clearly troubled by the evidence we had presented. She ordered the handwriting analysis over the objections of Linda and Frank's attorney and scheduled a hearing to review all the evidence. This case raises serious concerns about testamentary capacity and potential undue influence, Judge Sullivan stated during a preliminary hearing. The court has an obligation to ensure that the decedent's true wishes are honored, particularly when there are questions about mental capacity and family pressure. We will proceed with a full evidentiary hearing. The hearing was scheduled for 2 months out, giving both sides time to prepare their cases and allowing time for the handwriting analysis to be completed. During those 2 months, the situation with my family deteriorated further. Linda sent me a long email accusing me of disrespecting our mother's memory and dragging the family through unnecessary legal proceedings. She claimed that Grandma Ruth had made her wishes clear in the new will and that I was being selfish and greedy by refusing to accept it. "You're destroying this family over money," Linda wrote. "Mom would be ashamed of how you're behaving. She wanted Frank and me to have the house so we could sell it and use the proceeds for our own families. She knew you had a good job and didn't need the money, but you can't accept that she valued her own children over her grandson. You're tearing this family apart because you can't handle not getting what you want." The email was manipulative and hurtful, but it also made me more determined to expose the truth. Linda and Frank had forged or pressured Grandma Ruth into signing a will that contradicted her true wishes, and they were now trying to make me the villain for challenging it. I didn't respond to Linda's email. Instead, I focused on preparing for the hearing with Gerald. About a month before the hearing, we received the results of the handwriting analysis. A certified forensic document examiner had compared the signature on the new will to verified samples of Grandma Ruth's signature from various documents over the years. The examiner's report was damning for Linda and Frank's case. While the signature on the new will had some similarities to Grandma Ruth's actual signature, there were also significant inconsistencies that suggested either forgery or that the signature had been obtained when Ruth was in severe cognitive and physical distress. The signature exhibits tremor and hesitation that is inconsistent with the exemplars from the same time period, the report stated. Additionally, the formation of certain letters differs significantly from the decedent's established signature pattern. While I cannot conclusively state that this is a forgery, the signature raises serious questions about the circumstances under which it was obtained and whether the signatory was acting voluntarily and with full understanding. Gerald was pleased with the report. This, combined with the medical records, Helen's testimony, and Ruth's encrypted email, gives us a very strong case. The judge is going to have to seriously consider whether that new will reflects Ruth's true wishes or whether it was obtained through pressure and manipulation when she wasn't mentally capable of understanding what she was signing. The hearing finally arrived. I sat in the courtroom with Gerald, nervous but also feeling prepared. We had built a comprehensive case with multiple layers of evidence, all pointing to the same conclusion. The new will was invalid, and Grandma Ruth's true wishes should be honored. Linda and Frank sat on the other side of the courtroom with their attorney, a woman named Barbara Klein, who had a reputation for aggressive representation in estate disputes. They both looked confident, apparently believing their case was strong. Judge Sullivan called the hearing to order and outlined how it would proceed. We would present our evidence first, then Linda and Frank's attorney would present their case, and then the judge would make her ruling. Gerald began by presenting Grandma Ruth's medical records, walking the court through the progression of her dementia, and documenting her cognitive state 3 weeks before her passing, when the new will was allegedly signed. Your Honor, these records show that Ruth Brooks was in severe cognitive decline at the time this will was purportedly executed, Gerald explained. She was experiencing significant memory loss, confusion, and difficulty with decision-making. Medical professionals had documented that she was unable to manage her own affairs and required full-time care. This is not someone who had the mental capacity to execute a valid will. Barbara Klein objected. Your Honor, having dementia doesn't automatically mean someone lacks testamentary capacity. Mrs. Brooks was assessed by attorney Mark Stevens before signing the will, and he determined she understood what she was signing. We'll hear from Mr. Stevens later, Judge Sullivan replied. Continue, Mr. Thompson. Gerald then called Helen to testify about Grandma Ruth's mental state and about Linda and Frank's visits where they pressured her to sign documents. Helen described in detail how Grandma Ruth had been confused during these visits, how she had repeatedly asked what she was signing, and how Linda had assured her it was just routine paperwork. Did Mrs. Brooks ever express concern about what she was signing? Gerald asked. Yes, Helen replied. She would ask if she should call Ethan or call her lawyer. She seemed worried that she didn't understand what the papers were, but Linda would tell her not to worry, that it was simple and didn't require a lawyer. Mrs. Brooks didn't seem reassured, but she signed anyway because Linda was very insistent. Barbara Klein cross-examined Helen, trying to suggest that Helen was biased in my favor because I had hired her. But Helen remained consistent in her testimony, calmly describing what she had observed without embellishment. Then came the crucial moment. Gerald introduced the encrypted email as evidence and read it aloud in court. The courtroom was silent as Gerald read Grandma Ruth's words describing the pressure from Linda and Frank, her confusion, and her explicit statement that the house should go to me. When he finished reading, I saw Linda's face had gone pale, and Frank was whispering urgently to Barbara Klein. Your Honor, this email is Ruth Brooks's own words, written just days before the alleged new will was signed, Gerald stated. She explicitly states that she's being pressured by Linda and Frank, that she's confused, and that her true wish is for her grandson Ethan to have the lakeside house. This email proves that any will signed after this date, particularly one that contradicts these stated wishes, was obtained through pressure and manipulation when Mrs. Brooks was not mentally capable of resisting. Barbara Klein stood up immediately. Your Honor, we object to this email being admitted as evidence. We question its authenticity, and even if it is authentic, it simply shows that Mrs. Brooks was confused before she met with attorney Mark Stevens. Once she met with Mr. Stevens and had everything explained to her clearly, she voluntarily decided to execute the new will. That email doesn't invalidate the will. The court will consider the email along with all the other evidence, Judge Sullivan replied. Ms. Klein, you may present your case. Barbara Klein called Mark Stevens, the attorney who had allegedly prepared the new will for Grandma Ruth. Stevens testified that Linda had contacted him about 3 weeks before Ruth's passing, saying her mother wanted to update her will but didn't want to use her longtime attorney because there had been disagreements about the estate plan. I met with Mrs. Brooks at her home, Stevens testified. I explained the new will to her, and she indicated that she understood it and wanted to execute it. She seemed clear about her wishes to have the property go to her children rather than to her grandson. Gerald cross-examined Stevens thoroughly. Mr. Stevens, did you review Mrs. Brooks's medical records before meeting with her? No, I didn't, Stevens admitted. Did you speak with her doctors about her mental capacity? No. Did you interview anyone who knew Mrs. Brooks well about her typical wishes regarding the property? No, I relied on what Mrs. Brooks and her daughter Linda told me. Were you aware that Mrs. Brooks had been diagnosed with dementia? Stevens hesitated. Linda mentioned that her mother had some memory issues, but she said Mrs. Brooks was having a good day when I met with her. Did you independently verify that Mrs. Brooks had testamentary capacity? Or did you simply take Linda's word for it? I assessed Mrs. Brooks's capacity based on my conversation with her, Stevens replied defensively. And how long was this conversation? About 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Gerald repeated. You determined that an 84-year-old woman with diagnosed dementia had the capacity to execute a will that contradicted her long-standing wishes, based on a 20-minute conversation at a meeting arranged by the beneficiaries of that new will. Is that correct? I followed proper procedures, Stevens insisted, but his testimony had clearly raised doubts about whether he had done adequate due diligence in assessing Grandma Ruth's capacity. Barbara Klein also presented the new will itself, arguing that it was properly executed with witnesses and that it represented Ruth's final wishes. She called Linda to testify about how Ruth had expressed concerns about fairness and had wanted to change her will to treat all her children equally. Gerald cross-examined Linda directly. Miss Parker, you testified that your mother wanted to change her will to be more fair to her children. But isn't it true that your mother sent an email to her attorney 3 weeks before her passing, expressing concern that you were pressuring her to sign documents she didn't understand? Linda's face flushed. I don't know anything about an email. Your Honor, I'd like to show the witness the email that was entered as evidence earlier. Gerald handed Linda a copy of the encrypted email. I watched her face as she read it, seeing her expression shift from defiance to discomfort. This email says that you were pressuring your mother, telling her that her existing estate plan was unfair and that she was confused and didn't want to sign anything, Gerald stated. Does that refresh your memory about your mother's actual wishes? My mother was confused a lot near the end, Linda replied carefully. She would say things one day and contradict herself the next. When we met with Mark Stevens, she was clear about wanting Frank and me to have the house. Or was she simply confused and going along with what you told her to do because she had dementia and you were pressuring her? Gerald challenged. Objection. Argumentative, Barbara Klein called out. Sustained, Judge Sullivan said. But the court notes the question for consideration. After both sides had presented their evidence and testimony, Judge Sullivan called a recess to review the materials before issuing her ruling. Gerald and I waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, both of us tense and uncertain about which way the judge would rule. We presented a strong case, Gerald assured me. The medical evidence, Helen's testimony, and especially Ruth's email all support our position. But will contests are always unpredictable. It's ultimately up to the judge's interpretation of the evidence. After about an hour, we were called back into the courtroom. Judge Sullivan looked serious as she prepared to deliver her ruling. This case presents troubling questions about testamentary capacity, undue influence, and the exploitation of an elderly woman with dementia, Judge Sullivan began. After reviewing all the evidence presented, the court finds as follows. She went through the evidence methodically, discussing the medical records that showed Grandma Ruth's severe cognitive decline, Helen's testimony about the pressure and confusion, the handwriting analysis that raised questions about the signature, and the encrypted email that documented Grandma Ruth's concerns and true wishes. The email written by Mrs. Brooks is particularly compelling, Judge Sullivan stated. In her own words, written just days before the alleged new will was executed, Mrs. Brooks explicitly states that she is being pressured by her daughter Linda, that she is confused, and that her true wish is for her grandson Ethan to inherit the lakeside property. This email directly contradicts the will presented by Linda and Frank Parker, and it strongly suggests that any will signed after this email was obtained through pressure when Mrs. Brooks was not mentally capable of resisting that pressure. I felt my heart racing as Judge Sullivan continued. Additionally, the handwriting analysis raises serious questions about whether Mrs. Brooks's signature on the new will was obtained voluntarily and with full understanding. The signature shows signs of distress, and differs significantly from her established signature pattern. Judge Sullivan looked directly at Linda and Frank. The court finds that the will dated 3 weeks before Mrs. Brooks's passing was executed when she lacked testamentary capacity due to her advanced dementia. The court further finds that there is clear and convincing evidence of undue influence by Linda and Frank Parker, who pressured Mrs. Brooks to sign a document she did not understand and which contradicted her long-standing and clearly expressed wishes. Therefore, the court invalidates the will dated 3 weeks before Mrs. Brooks's passing. The court reinstates the earlier will executed by Mrs. Brooks with attorney Gerald Thompson, which leaves the lakeside property to her grandson Ethan Brooks. That will represents Mrs. Brooks's true wishes and will be honored by this court. I felt overwhelming relief wash over me. The judge had ruled in my favor. Grandma Ruth's true wishes would be honored, but Judge Sullivan wasn't finished. Additionally, the court finds that Linda and Frank Parker's conduct in this matter was improper and potentially fraudulent. Pressuring an elderly woman with dementia to sign legal documents she doesn't understand, and then presenting that document as her true wishes while knowing she had explicitly stated otherwise, is unconscionable behavior. The court orders Linda and Frank Parker to pay all legal costs incurred by Ethan Brooks in contesting this will, which total approximately $45,000. Furthermore, the court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud and elder exploitation. Linda and Frank looked stunned. Not only had they lost the house, but they were now facing potential criminal investigation and were being ordered to pay my legal fees. Barbara Klein stood up. "Your Honor, we request the opportunity to appeal this ruling." "You may file an appeal if you wish," Judge Sullivan replied, "but the court's ruling stands and the property will be transferred to Ethan Brooks immediately. This hearing is adjourned." As the judge left the courtroom, I turned to Gerald, barely able to process what had just happened. "We won," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "We did," Gerald confirmed, smiling. "Ruth's wishes are going to be honored. The house is yours, just as she always intended." I looked across the courtroom at Linda and Frank, who were in heated discussion with their attorney. Linda caught my eye for a moment, and I saw pure hatred in her expression. But I felt no satisfaction in her anger, just sadness that she and Frank had been willing to betray their own mother for money, and had forced me to fight them in court to honor her wishes. The aftermath of the court ruling was complicated. Linda and Frank did file an appeal, but it was denied within 2 months. The appellate court agreed with Judge Sullivan's findings that the evidence of Grandma Ruth's lack of capacity and the undue influence were overwhelming. The district attorney's office also opened an investigation into Linda and Frank's conduct, though I wasn't privy to the details. I learned through Gerald that they were facing potential charges of elder exploitation and fraud, though I didn't follow the criminal case closely. My focus was on finally claiming the lakeside house that Grandma Ruth had wanted me to have. The property transfer process took a few more months to finalize, but eventually I received the deed to the lakeside house. Standing in front of the house with the deed in my hand, I felt overwhelming emotion. This place that had been my sanctuary, my safe haven, my connection to the best memories of my childhood was finally legally mine. But it was also empty without Grandma Ruth. Walking through the rooms where we had cooked together, laughed together, and where she had told me countless times that this would always be my home, I felt profound grief mixed with gratitude. I decided to renovate the house, not to change its character, but to honor Grandma Ruth's memory while making it suitable for my own life going forward. I hired contractors to update the kitchen, modernize the bathrooms, and repair some of the structural issues that had developed over the years. Throughout the renovation, I made sure to preserve the elements that had made the house special. The large windows overlooking the lake, the stone fireplace in the living room, the wraparound porch where Grandma Ruth and I had spent countless summer evenings. I also created a dedicated space to honor Grandma Ruth's memory. In the main living room, I installed a beautiful shelf, displaying photos of her and my grandfather, along with some of her favorite books and mementos from her life. I included a framed copy of the encrypted email she had sent, the email that had ultimately saved her legacy and ensured her true wishes were honored. The renovation took about 4 months. When it was finally complete, I moved into the lakeside house permanently, selling my condo in Portland. Working remotely as a software engineer made it possible for me to live in the Clearwater community while maintaining my career. Living in the house full-time was an adjustment, but it was also healing. I would wake up to views of the lake, spend evenings on the porch watching the sunset, and gradually began to feel like the house was truly mine rather than just a place I visited. I also started building connections in the Clearwater community. Many of the neighbors remembered Grandma Ruth fondly and were glad to see that her grandson was living in the house, rather than having it sold to strangers. I joined the local community association, volunteered for lake cleanup efforts, and slowly began to feel like I was part of the place rather than just a visitor. About a year after the court case concluded, I was working in the renovated kitchen when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see my father standing there, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. "Hi, Ethan," he said. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. Can we talk?" I hesitated. My father had sided with Linda and Frank during the will contest, had told me to drop the case and accept their version of events. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but I also knew that holding on to anger and resentment wasn't what Grandma Ruth would have wanted. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. My father walked through the renovated house, looking at the updates I had made while also seeing the familiar elements that had been preserved. When we sat down in the living room, he looked at the display honoring Grandma Ruth's memory. "The house looks great," he said. "Mom would be happy that you've taken care of it." "That's what I've tried to do," I replied. "Honor her memory and preserve what she loved about this place." My father was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I should have supported you during the will contest. I should have believed you when you said Linda and Frank had pressured Mom. Instead, I took their side and told you to give up. That was wrong." "Why did you side with them?" I asked. "Because it was easier," my father admitted. "Linda and Frank are my siblings. Going against them felt like betraying family. And I wanted to believe that Mom had voluntarily changed her will, that this wasn't about them manipulating her. It was easier to believe that than to face that my own sister and brother would exploit our mother. But they did exploit her," I said. "The court found clear evidence of that." "I know," my father replied, "and I'm ashamed that I didn't see it or that I didn't want to see it. You were the one who had the courage to fight for what Mom actually wanted. You honored her memory better than any of her own children did." The apology was genuine, and I could see that my father was struggling with his own guilt and regret. We talked for over an hour, discussing the will contest, the evidence that had been presented, and what had happened in the year since. "Have you talked to Linda or Frank?" I asked. "Not much," my father said. "They're still angry about losing the case and about the criminal investigation. They blame you for all of it, but I think they know they did wrong. They're just too proud to admit it." I didn't ask about the criminal investigation. That was between Linda, Frank, and the legal system. What mattered to me was that Grandma Ruth's wishes had been honored and that her house was being preserved and loved. Before my father left, he looked at me seriously. "Your grandmother loved you very much, Ethan. She talked about you all the time, about how you were the only one who really appreciated this place and who spent time with her because you wanted to, not because you wanted something. She was right to leave this house to you. I'm sorry I ever questioned that." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." My relationship with my father gradually improved after that conversation. We weren't close, probably never would be given our history, but we had rebuilt a basic level of respect and communication. He would visit occasionally, and we would sit on the porch and talk about Grandma Ruth, about the family, about life. 2 years after the court case, the house renovations were complete, and I had fully settled into life at the lakeside property. I had also started a tradition of hosting an annual gathering at the house to honor Grandma Ruth's memory. I invited neighbors, community members, and anyone who had known her. We would share stories, look at photos, and celebrate the woman who had meant so much to so many people. During one of these gatherings, an elderly neighbor named Margaret approached me. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," she said. "Not just for fighting to keep this house, but for what you've done with it. She always said this place should be filled with life and love and people who appreciate it. You're honoring that vision." "That's what I've tried to do," I replied. "This house was her legacy, and I want to make sure that legacy is preserved." "You've done more than preserve it," Margaret said. "You've brought it back to life. After Ruth got sick and in those final months, this house felt sad and empty. Now it feels alive again. That's a beautiful tribute to her memory." 3 years after winning the court case, I met someone. Her name was Olivia, and she was a teacher at the local elementary school in Clearwater. We met at a community event and started dating slowly, both of us cautious about relationships given past experiences. When I finally brought Olivia to the lakeside house, I was nervous about how she would react. This place was so important to me, so connected to my memories of Grandma Ruth, that I needed someone in my life to understand and appreciate that. Olivia walked through the house looking at the renovations, the preserved elements, and the display honoring Grandma Ruth's memory. Then she walked out onto the porch overlooking the lake and stood there for a long moment. "This place is special," she said finally. "I can feel the love here. Your grandmother must have been an amazing person." "She was," I replied. "She saved me in a lot of ways. This house saved me." "I understand why you fought so hard to keep it," Olivia said. "This isn't just property. It's your connection to someone who loved you unconditionally." Knowing that Olivia understood what this house meant to me made me realize that I was ready to move forward with my life while still honoring the past. 4 years after the will contest, I proposed to Olivia on the porch of the lakeside house, in the same spot where Grandma Ruth had told me countless times that this place would always be my home. Olivia said yes, and we planned a small wedding ceremony to be held at the house the following summer. The wedding was intimate and beautiful, with about 50 guests including neighbors, friends, and even my father. We exchanged vows on the lawn overlooking the lake, with the house that had meant so much to me serving as the backdrop for the beginning of my new life with Olivia. As I stood there with Olivia, looking out at the lake and the house, I thought about Grandma Ruth, and how grateful I was that she had fought to ensure this place remained in the family. Her encrypted email, her clear statement of her true wishes, had been the evidence that saved her legacy and gave me the home I needed. 5 years after the court case concluded, I received unexpected news. Linda and Frank had both been convicted of elder exploitation charges related to their manipulation of Grandma Ruth. The sentences were relatively light, probation and fines rather than prison time, but the convictions meant they had criminal records and had been publicly acknowledged as people who had exploited their own mother for financial gain. I felt no satisfaction in their convictions, just sadness that it had come to that. They had destroyed their relationships with me and with my father, had tarnished their mother's memory, and had damaged their own reputations and futures, all for a house they never got. But I also recognized that their consequences were the result of their own choices. They had chosen to pressure Grandma Ruth, to manipulate her when she was vulnerable, to forge or obtain documents through deception. They had gambled that they could get away with it, and they had lost. Meanwhile, I had the house, the life, and the peace that Grandma Ruth had wanted for me. I had honored her memory by fighting for her true wishes, by preserving the house she loved, and by building a life there that reflected the values she had instilled in me. 6 years after inheriting the lakeside house, I stood on the porch one morning, watching the sunrise over the lake. Olivia was still asleep inside, and I had come out here to have my coffee and think about everything that had happened since Grandma Ruth passed. The journey from her passing to this moment had been difficult. Fighting the will contest, dealing with family betrayal, facing isolation and accusations, all of it had been painful and exhausting. But it had also taught me important lessons about standing up for what's right, about honoring the wishes of people we love, and about recognizing that sometimes the family members who seem most concerned are actually the most dangerous. Grandma Ruth had known that Linda and Frank were more interested in her property than in her well-being. She had tried to protect her wishes by working with Gerald Thompson, and creating a clear will. And when she realized Linda and Frank were pressuring her, she had tried to document it through the encrypted email. That email, which I had almost overlooked, had been the key to everything. It had proven her mental state, her true wishes, and the pressure she was under. It had given the judge the evidence needed to invalidate the forged will and restore Grandma Ruth's actual wishes. Looking back, I realized that everything I had done to contest the will had been worth it. Not just because I got to keep the house, though that mattered enormously, but because I had ensured that Grandma Ruth's voice was heard even after she passed. Her wishes had been honored, her legacy had been preserved, and the people who had tried to exploit her had faced consequences. That morning on the porch, I made a decision. I was going to establish a fund to help other people who were facing similar situations, people whose elderly relatives were being exploited, or whose family members were trying to steal inheritances through manipulation and fraud. I would work with Gerald to create a legal assistance fund that could help people contest fraudulent wills and fight back against elder exploitation. We could call it the Ruth Brooks Justice Fund, Gerald suggested when I discussed the idea with him. Use your grandmother's name to honor her memory and help others who are facing what you faced. The fund was established with an initial donation of $100,000 from my savings. Over the following years, it helped dozens of families fight will contests, challenge elder exploitation, and honor the true wishes of their loved ones. Each time the fund helped someone, I thought about Grandma Ruth and about how her experience had led to something that could help others avoid the pain and injustice of having their loved ones exploited. 7. Years after the will contest, I received a letter from Linda. It was the first communication I'd had from her since the court case concluded. The letter was brief and carefully worded, clearly written with legal advice. Ethan, I know we haven't spoken in years, and I understand why. What Frank and I did to Mom was wrong. We convinced ourselves that we deserved the house, that it was unfair for you to get the most valuable asset. But we were really just greedy. We pressured Mom when she was vulnerable, and we tried to steal something she clearly wanted you to have. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know what we did was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for betraying Mom, for betraying you, and for putting money ahead of family. I hope you're happy in the lakeside house. Mom would be glad that you're the one who ended up with it. Linda. I read the letter several times, trying to determine if the apology was genuine or just another manipulation. But ultimately, it didn't matter. Whether Linda truly felt remorse or was just trying to ease her own guilt, the damage had been done. She and Frank had chosen to exploit their mother, and they had faced the consequences of that choice. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say that would change what had happened or rebuild a relationship that had been destroyed by betrayal. Instead, I filed the letter away and continued focusing on the life I had built. 8 years after inheriting the house, Olivia and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Ruth after my grandmother. Holding baby Ruth in the house that her great-grandmother had fought so hard to preserve for me, I felt a profound sense of connection across generations. Your great-grandmother would have loved you so much, I told Ruth, as I rocked her in the nursery we had created in one of the upstairs bedrooms. She would have brought you down to the lake, taught you to fish, let you help in the garden, and she would have told you stories about your grandfather, about this house, about family. As Ruth grew, I made sure she knew about the great-grandmother she was named after. I showed her photos, told her stories, and explained how this house that was her home had been a gift from someone who loved deeply and who had fought, even in her final confused days, to protect what mattered most. 9 years after the court case, I was contacted by a journalist writing a book about elder exploitation and estate fraud. She had learned about Grandma Ruth's case through court records and wanted to include it as an example of how family members exploit elderly relatives and how those crimes can be exposed and punished. I agreed to be interviewed, thinking that sharing the story might help raise awareness about elder exploitation and might encourage others to fight back when they see it happening. The book was published the following year with a chapter dedicated to Grandma Ruth's case. It detailed how Linda and Frank had pressured her, how they had obtained the fraudulent will, and how the encrypted email had ultimately exposed their scheme. The book became a resource for attorneys and advocates working on elder exploitation cases, and several readers reached out to thank me for sharing the story. Your grandmother's case has helped us win 3 will contests this year, one attorney wrote to me. The encrypted email strategy, the importance of documenting cognitive decline, and the use of caregiver testimony have all been crucial in our cases. Thank you for fighting for your grandmother's wishes and for being willing to share what you learned. 10 years after the will contest that changed my life, I stood in the same courtroom where Judge Sullivan had ruled in my favor. But this time, I was there as an advocate rather than as a party to a case. I had been invited to speak at a continuing legal education seminar about estate litigation and elder exploitation. I told the assembled attorneys about Grandma Ruth's case, about the warning signs of exploitation, about the importance of documentation and evidence, and about how family members who seem most concerned about an elderly relative's well-being are sometimes the ones exploiting them most aggressively. My aunt and uncle were very good at appearing to be concerned children, I explained. They visited more frequently when my grandmother's health declined. They talked about wanting to protect her and make sure she was safe. But what they were really doing was positioning themselves to manipulate her and steal her property. I shared the specific evidence that had won the case: the medical records, the caregiver testimony, the handwriting analysis, and most importantly, the encrypted email where Grandma Ruth had documented the pressure she was facing. If your client expresses concerns about being pressured or manipulated, document it immediately, I advised. Get it in writing, record it if possible, make sure there's evidence that can be presented in court if needed. That encrypted email saved my grandmother's legacy. Without it, Linda and Frank might have gotten away with their scheme. After the seminar, several attorneys approached me to discuss their own cases involving elder exploitation. Some asked for advice, others shared stories similar to mine, and many thanked me for being willing to speak publicly about a painful family situation. It takes courage to expose family members, one attorney told me. A lot of people in your situation would have just accepted the fraudulent will rather than fight their own aunt and uncle in court. Your grandmother was lucky to have you. I was lucky to have her, I replied. Fighting for her wishes was the least I could do to honor everything she had done for me. 11 years after inheriting the lakeside house, I had fully embraced life in the Clearwater community. I served on the Community Association Board, volunteered with local environmental groups focused on lake conservation, and had become friends with many of the neighbors who had known Grandma Ruth. The house itself had become a gathering place for the community. I hosted annual summer barbecues, allowed local groups to use the property for events, and generally tried to ensure that the house was a positive presence in the community rather than just private property. Your grandmother would love what you've done with this place, Margaret, the elderly neighbor, told me during one of the summer gatherings. She always believed that beautiful places should be shared, that they were meant to bring people together. You're honoring that belief. That's what I've tried to do, I said. Make this house about more than just me, about more than just property. It's a legacy, and legacies are meant to be shared. 12 years after the will contest, my daughter Ruth was now 4 years old and spending her days doing many of the same things I had done at the lakeside house as a child. She would help me in the garden, play by the lake under careful supervision, and listen to stories about her great-grandmother. Great-grandma Ruth was very brave, I told her one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. She fought to make sure this house stayed in our family, even when some people tried to take it away. Because of her, we get to live here and enjoy this beautiful place. I love this house, Ruth said simply. It's the best house in the whole world. Great-grandma Ruth felt the same way, I replied, pulling her close. That's why she wanted to make sure we would always have it. Looking out at the lake with my daughter beside me and Olivia inside preparing dinner, I felt overwhelming gratitude for everything that had happened. The will contest had been difficult and painful, but it had resulted in justice, in my family having the home Grandma Ruth wanted us to have, and in my being able to build a life that honored her memory and her values. The lakeside house had been my sanctuary as a child, my refuge during difficult times as an adult. And now it was my daughter's home and her connection to a great grandmother she would never meet, but whose love and legacy surrounded her every day. I thought about how differently things could have turned out. If I hadn't found the encrypted email on Grandma Ruth's tablet, if I hadn't been persistent in gathering evidence, if I had listened to my father and other family members who told me to just accept the fraudulent will, Linda and Frank would have gotten away with their scheme. The house would have been sold, the proceeds divided, and Grandma Ruth's true wishes would have been ignored. But because I had fought back, because I had trusted my instincts that something was wrong, and because I had been willing to challenge family members even when it was uncomfortable and isolating, justice had been served. The house was mine, Grandma Ruth's wishes had been honored, and Linda and Frank had faced consequences for their exploitation. That was the real lesson of the entire experience. The importance of fighting for what's right even when it's difficult, the value of documentation and evidence, and the necessity of holding people accountable for exploitation and fraud even when those people are family. 13 years after the court case, I received unexpected news. Frank had passed away from a heart attack. My father called to tell me about the funeral arrangements and to ask if I would be attending. I thought carefully about whether to go. Frank had tried to steal my inheritance, had exploited his own mother, and had shown no genuine remorse for his actions. I owed him nothing, but I also thought about Grandma Ruth and about what she would have wanted. Despite everything, Frank had been her son, and she had loved him even though she had been disappointed by his choices. I decided to attend the funeral, not for Frank, but to honor Grandma Ruth's memory and to support my father, who was dealing with the loss of his brother despite their complicated history. At the funeral, I saw Linda for the first time in 13 years. She looked older, worn down by years of guilt and consequences. When our eyes met, she nodded slightly but didn't approach me. I nodded back, acknowledging her presence but making no move to speak. After the service, my father approached me. "Thank you for coming," he said. I know it wasn't easy given everything that happened. "I came for Grandma Ruth," I replied. "And for you, not for Frank." "I understand," my father said. "Frank never recovered from the will contest, you know. The criminal conviction, the embarrassment, the loss of the house he'd convinced himself he deserved. It ate at him for years. I think it contributed to his health problems." "He made his choices," I said. "He chose to exploit his own mother to forge her will, to try to steal property that she explicitly wanted me to have. Those choices had consequences." "They did," my father agreed. "And those consequences were deserved. I'm not making excuses for him. I just wanted you to know that he did suffer for what he did." I felt no satisfaction in Frank's suffering, but I also felt no guilt about the role I had played in exposing his fraud. He had committed crimes against his own mother, and he had faced the legal and personal consequences of those crimes. 14 years after inheriting the lakeside house, I had turned 47 and had built a life that exceeded anything I could have imagined during those difficult years when I was fighting the will contest. The house was a home filled with love and family. The Ruth Brooks Justice Fund had helped over 50 families fight elder exploitation and fraudulent wills. And I had found peace and purpose in honoring Grandma Ruth's legacy while building my own. On what would have been Grandma Ruth's 100th birthday, I organized a special gathering at the lakeside house. I invited everyone who had known her, everyone who had been helped by the Justice Fund, and everyone who had supported me during the will contest. Gerald Thompson attended, now semi-retired but still practicing law occasionally. Helen, Grandma Ruth's former caregiver, came and shared stories about the time she spent caring for her. Neighbors who had known Grandma Ruth for decades attended and reminisced about her kindness and her love for the lakeside community. During the gathering, I gave a short speech honoring Grandma Ruth's memory. "My grandmother gave me two great gifts," I said to the assembled guests. "The first was this house, this beautiful sanctuary that she and my grandfather built, and that became my refuge during the hardest times of my life. The second was the example of fighting for what's right, even when it's difficult. When Linda and Frank tried to manipulate her into changing her will, She tried to protect her true wishes by documenting what was happening. That encrypted email she sent was her final act of resistance against exploitation, and it ultimately saved her legacy. I talked about the will contest, about the evidence that had exposed Linda and Frank's fraud, and about the importance of honoring elderly people's wishes rather than exploiting their vulnerability. Elder exploitation is common and often goes unpunished, I explained. Family members pressure elderly relatives to sign documents, forge wills, steal assets, all while convincing themselves they're entitled to what they're taking. My grandmother's case shows that this kind of exploitation can be stopped, but it requires courage, documentation, and persistence. After the speech, several people approached me to share their own experiences with elder exploitation or to thank me for creating the justice fund that had helped them. One woman told me, "My mother was being pressured by my brother to sign over her house. I used the strategies from your grandmother's case, documented everything, got medical records, and successfully challenged his attempts. Your grandmother's story saved my mother's home." Hearing stories like that reinforced why fighting the will contest had been worth all the difficulty and pain. Grandma Ruth's experience had become a template for protecting other elderly people from exploitation. 15 years after the court case that changed my life, I stood on the porch of the lakeside house one evening, watching another beautiful sunset over the water. Little Ruth, now 7 years old, was playing in the yard. Olivia was inside preparing dinner, and I was reflecting on everything that had happened since Grandma Ruth passed. The journey from her passing to this moment had been long and often difficult. Fighting the will contest had cost me relationships with most of my extended family. It had been expensive, stressful, and emotionally exhausting. There had been times when I doubted whether fighting was worth it, whether I should just accept the fraudulent will and move on. But every time I walked through this house, every time I looked out at the lake, every time I thought about Grandma Ruth and everything she had done for me, I knew that fighting had been the right choice. This house represented her love, her values, and her wishes. Letting Linda and Frank steal it would have been a betrayal of everything she stood for. The house had been renovated and updated, but it still felt like Grandma Ruth's home. The bones of the place, the views, the feeling of sanctuary, all of that remained. And now a new generation was growing up here, learning the values of family, of fighting for what's right, of honoring those who came before us. I thought about Linda and Frank sometimes, wondering if they ever truly understood the magnitude of what they had done. They had tried to steal their mother's legacy for money. They had exploited her vulnerability and her confusion. They had forged legal documents and lied to family members. And in doing so, they had destroyed their own reputations, faced criminal consequences, and lost any claim to their mother's love and respect. Meanwhile, I had honored Grandma Ruth's wishes, preserved her legacy, and built a life that reflected her values. The contrast between our outcomes was a powerful reminder that integrity and doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, leads to better outcomes than greed and exploitation. As the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt profound gratitude. Gratitude for Grandma Ruth and her love. Gratitude for the house and all it represented. Gratitude for the family I had built with Olivia and little Ruth. And gratitude for the opportunity to help others through the Justice Fund and through sharing my story. The lakeside house that Linda and Frank had tried to steal had become more than just property. It had become a symbol of resistance against exploitation, a testament to the importance of honoring elderly people's wishes, and a legacy that would continue for generations. That was Grandma Ruth's gift to me, not just the house itself, but everything it represented about love, family, and fighting for what's right. If you're watching this and recognizing patterns from your own family, if you have relatives being pressured to sign documents they don't understand, if you suspect that family members are exploiting an elderly loved one, I want you to know that you can fight back. Document everything. Save emails, texts, medical records, anything that shows the truth of what's happening. Work with attorneys who specialize in estate litigation and elder exploitation. And don't be afraid to challenge family members who are doing wrong, even if other relatives pressure you to stay quiet. Linda and Frank tried to steal my grandmother's house by exploiting her dementia and forging her will. They thought they could get away with it because I was just the grandson, because they were her actual children, and because they believed the new will would be accepted without question. They were wrong. The encrypted email my grandmother sent, the medical records documenting her decline, the testimony from her caregiver, and the handwriting analysis all combined to expose their fraud. The judge invalidated their fraudulent will, restored my grandmother's true wishes, ordered them to pay my legal fees, and referred them for criminal prosecution. The house that they tried to steal became mine, just as Grandma Ruth had always intended. And more than that, fighting for her wishes led to the creation of a legal fund that has helped dozens of other families fight similar exploitation. Grandma Ruth's experience and her courage in trying to document what was happening to her have had an impact far beyond just our family. That's the real legacy. Not the house itself, though I treasure it, but the justice that was served and the help that case has provided to others facing similar situations. Grandma Ruth's voice was heard even after she passed, and her experience has helped protect other elderly people from the kind of exploitation she faced. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might be dealing with elder exploitation or inheritance fraud. Drop a comment about your own experiences with family members pressuring elderly relatives or fighting over estates. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for what's right and honoring the wishes of people we love. Remember, documentation is your most powerful tool when challenging fraud or exploitation. Your elderly relatives' wishes matter and should be protected, even if that means fighting family members who are trying to take advantage of them. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who's dealing with a fraudulent will, elder exploitation, or family members trying to steal an inheritance. You can fight back. You can gather evidence. You can challenge fraud even when it's committed by family. It took time, it took courage, and it took persistence, but justice was served. And more importantly, my grandmother's wishes were honored, her legacy was preserved, and the house she loved is now home to another generation of family who will love it and care for it just as she did. The grandson who was told to accept the fraudulent will became the rightful owner who exposed the fraud. The aunt and uncle who tried to steal the inheritance faced criminal prosecution and public disgrace. And the lakeside house that was at the center of it all became a home, a sanctuary, and a legacy that will continue for generations. That's not just my victory, it's my grandmother's victory. Proof that love and integrity are more powerful than greed and manipulation.